Hi, I'm Graham Palmer, and this is my granddad. He was a stretcher bearer in the First World War. When hostilities broke out, he was just 19. He was one of the lucky ones who came home. He soon married a girl called Gertie, a girl who eventually left me her postcard collection. For me, the things penciled on the back of the cards were far more interesting than the cards themselves. Gertie had cards from friends, soldiers and relatives. She had humorous postcards, cards of the ruins left by the war, and cards from anonymous soldiers. She also had local cards sent by my granddad in 1915 before he was posted overseas, as his unit moved around the country. Cards from Worthing, Hungerford and Dover. It struck me that the postcard was the not quite so instant messaging medium of the day. Like social media, it got me hooked. But this isn't Gertie's story. It's the story of a single card I bought on eBay. The story of a goat and a Welsh battalion in the home counties, and how they won over the hearts of the inhabitants of the small market town of Royston. In the days of stagecoaches, Royston provided a useful watering hole and stopover for travellers and troops on the Old North Road. The town grew up round a priory founded at the crossroads, where ancient heathland sweeps down to the Cambridgeshire fens. It has everything you'd expect, plus one or two you wouldn't. A market, a church, a town hall, a local museum, and then there's the mysterious cave with its carvings, a royal hunting lodge, and a remnant of the heath, which is now a site of special scientific interest. London is just 2 days' march for a foot soldier, if you don't mind the blisters, or a day's ride on a good horse. At the outbreak of the First World War, the twice-weekly market drew people in from the surrounding countryside. The high street was thriving. There was even a print shop and stationers which had already published a handsome hardback of the town's history, and every Thursday put the local newspaper to bed, ready for the following day. And in another shop, chemist and photographer Robert H. Clark had a sideline in local postcards which he produced himself. Nearly all of the vintage cards of Royston on eBay are Clark's images, so I was surprised when this unusual First World War postcard turned up. Clark lived on Baldock Road opposite the Heath, and the message on the card makes it clear that it was sent in March 1915 from Holmdale, his next-door neighbour's house, either by a guest or servant. That neighbour was Charles Warren, one of two brothers who owned and ran the local printers. The postcard was a generic one like this, definitely not one of Clark's. It must have been the Warrens who overprinted it with the words, "The 5th Battalion at Royston." I've not seen another like it. That got me thinking, why had they done it? Why was the writer so miserable about the Welsh soldiers leaving? And what were they doing there in the first place? Towards the end of February 1915, Melbourne Road echoed to the sound of 2,000 marching feet. The 5th Battalion of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers had travelled the paltry 13 miles from Cambridge, nothing compared to their usual route marches, and were to collapse that night into makeshift beds, hastily found for them by the townsfolk of Royston. Royston at that time boasted just under 4,000 people, so the soldiers' arrival proved a huge challenge. Some were billeted in the workhouse opposite the Heath, and many others made use of the institution's baths, going there in batches in the morning. The local paper was soon to report,
"Everything is working as if 1,000 or so men suddenly dropped into the town was nothing unusual. The inhabitants received them with open arms and hearts.
To the west, the heath proved perfect for both parades and training, while the soldiers threw themselves into town life, challenging the locals to football matches, running fundraising events at the cinema, and joining the remaining members of the town band, those who had not already enlisted, to perform at the cross. Patriotic postcards, "Don't be alarmed, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers are on guard," were all the rage, and no doubt Charles and Robert Warren made a bob or two over printing them. The writer's message on the back of the one I picked up on eBay is intriguing.
Dear Lou, just a PC to wish you many happy returns on the 21st. We'll send you a P later on as I'm rather bad off at the moment. 1,100 Welsh Fusiliers going to the front at some point this month. Hope you keep your promise for coming to see us when you get better. Hope you received the letter all right, as you've not answered it. Rather dull and miserable at the moment, but hope to get cheered up by the end of the week, if you know what I mean. Let me know when the wedding is. We will both come down to it. Love, A. Holmdale, Baldock Road, Royston.
Now, Holmdale was one of 4 newly built houses on the edge of the town, close by the workhouse at the foot of the heath. These were not 2 up, 2 downs. They were posh Edwardian villas for respectable citizens. Overton was owned by the photographer Clark, Westry by the town's draper, and Erindine and Holmdale by Robert and Charles Warren, respectively. It would seem that someone under Charles's roof was not pleased at all with the prospect of the town's Welsh visitors moving on. Unfortunately, by the 1921 census, Charles's mysterious servant or visitor had also moved on. All we have left of her is this postcard and the initial A. So, instead, I set off following the Welsh Fusiliers through the streets, via reports in the local newspaper. On Sundays, the incomers could be found swelling the congregations of all the local churches. In deference to the visitors, a minister at the Neesworth Street Congregational Church even addressed them in Welsh, having grown up in Wales, only to discover he had previously baptised some of them. His church opened its schoolroom, which now houses Royston Museum, as a soldier's welcome that served refreshments, as did the Methodist Church, and the ranks crowded in to play games, listen to music and pen their cards and letters home. As well as the lilt of the Welsh tongue, the soldiers brought with them a rather glorious goat that had been gifted to the Fusiliers by the King. The local paper reported,
The battalion mascot, a fine old goat with gilded horns, is beginning to know his way about and feeling quite at home. There is a confectioner's shop not 100 miles from the cross, which is a great attraction for him. He's been treated with biscuits and other good things from the shop on a few occasions, and now Billy, when he comes off parade, always wants to have a look in, and the goat major has difficulty in getting him by, unless something tasty is forthcoming.
Throughout their stay, the men's musical talent was in much demand. The first concert they gave at the town hall was packed out, and so many people were turned away that they ran it again the same week. The evening's highlight was a 20-strong Welsh male voice choir. On St David's Day, the men celebrated by wearing leeks in their caps. Despite heavy snow and a thunderstorm, sports competitions took place on the heath. There was a dance for the ranks in the town hall, while the officers enjoyed a formal dinner elsewhere. On the 15th of March, 5 weeks after arriving in town, the troops were ordered to return to Cambridge.
The battalion paraded in the White Bear Meadow at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, and after inspection marched up Neesworth Street, headed by the bugle band and Billy the Goat, and left the town via Melbourne Road. Hundreds of people were out in the streets to wave a farewell to the boys as they swung by.
The Welsh Fusiliers had already promised another concert for that Thursday, and many returned from Cambridge so as not to disappoint the townsfolk. The proceeds would help fund the local knitting club, which had already made 1,200 socks, muffs and mittens for the troops on the front line. During the interval, Captain Elford H. Roberts spoke.
There was not a single man who would not prefer to spend 1 week in Royston to 3 months in Cambridge. The kindness and courtesy they had received here in Royston stood far above that of any other place, and the officers and men would carry with them the happiest and fondest recollections of the place.
Soon, the Cheshire Regiment was to occupy the beds vacated by their Welsh comrades in arms. If the good folk of Royston had thought 1,000 troops were a lot to accommodate, they now had to billet 3 times that number as the war rumbled on. The Welshmen were not forgotten though, and on the 23rd of August, many in the town were shocked to read how the Fusiliers' colonel had been killed fighting the Ottomans. One man wrote to the Flintshire County Herald,
I cannot tell you how deeply Royston is moved by the news conveyed in the Times. We in Royston loved your boys and feel we've lost some of our own. We're all awaiting the casualty list with great apprehension.
On the Welsh borders, anxious parents scoured the daily papers for news of their sons. Harden Parish magazine reported,
They know from the published list of casualties among officers of the battalion that they have been in action at the Dardanelles, but so far have not learnt anything of their fate.
The Welsh battalion had come ashore on the 8th of August at Silver Bay. The landing had started 2 days earlier, and those initial troops were pinned down on the beaches by Turkish snipers in the surrounding hills. Private Arthur Jones's letter home reveals how bloody the battle was on the day that the battalion's colonel died.
We were fighting on the latest landing, and it was simply and no trenches to take cover. We had to lay flat on the ground to fire when we were advancing. We were advancing under cover of our Navy's fire, and it is practically all bayonet work we did until I got wounded. The Turks do not like bayonet whatsoever, and they are up to all kinds of tricks to try to drive us back. About 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, August 10th, the Turks came up with their hands above their heads, as if they wanted to surrender. They're mostly dressed as Indian troops, but we could see it was another trick of theirs, so we waited until they got about 40 yards from where we were lying, and then poured hell into them. Well, there was not one of them alive 5 minutes afterwards.
Necessary defence or war crime? Whichever, it was not reported in Royston. Worried, the man who would be partly responsible for the planning of Royston's war memorial, Walter Titchmarsh, wrote to the editor of the Flintshire County Herald to express his sorrow that the battalion had had such a rough time at the Dardanelles. He was keen to hear the fate of those men who had been billeted in his house, but it would not be as bad as he had feared. Only one of the 7 he mentions is listed on the Helles Memorial in Turkey, and despite the Blitz having destroyed many records, those that survive show at least 4 of the men were issued with their campaign medals at the end of the war. No mention was made in the casualty lists of the fate of Billy, Royston's favourite gilded goat.